And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight. Lisa Cao is product manager at Data Strato, where she's working on open source multi-cloud data catalogs and metadata solutions. She also has a long history in open source technologies and contributions, which she'll talk a little bit about tonight. And I think I'll just go ahead and turn it over to you, Lisa, and you can kind of give us your introduction and what you'd like to mention about yourself before we get started.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lindsay, for having me, and of course, Angela here and the rest of the WTD2 team. I think that you guys are doing something incredible, and I really love that I get to be in this environment. A lot of my background is in data engineering, but previous to that, I was in data. I was a data analyst, and before that, I used to be in the psychology department at my university, and I worked in like a few different behavioral neuroscience labs. I've touched a little bit of bioinformatics, and I kind of worked my way up very slowly up into the R community, and then I jumped more into the general open source space through like data engineering, and then now I ended up as a product manager. So it's been probably like, if you count everything up, like a decade at this point of small wins over time that have accumulated. So that's kind of where things are at.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the background. That really helps kind of gain some perspective, and others can see themselves in your trajectory as well, and see that it's okay to have a multifaceted background. And it's definitely, sometimes a strength, and just learning the transferable skills and how to pivot and actually utilize your background from all facets is actually a superpower. So thanks for mentioning, not your non-traditional tech career background. Um, so getting started in, if I'm not mistaken, natural sciences and kind of lab work, right? Could you share a bit about that start in that career journey, and what were some key drivers and turning points in your professional evolution that kind of brought you into data?
Yeah, so I used to really want to pursue my PhD in like behavioral neuroendocrinology, which is such a mouthful. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. But generally speaking, I was really interested in the way that hormones interacted with the brain and how that had like these different behavioral effects. And I think my university that I was in was SFU, Simon Fraser University in Canada. And generally, it wasn't like this really huge or prestigious university, to be honest. And so our departments were pretty tight. The psychology department was pretty well known, but generally speaking, I was like a very like kind of tech savvy person in that I would be that person that would fix printers around if they were broken. But nothing like super hardcore. I didn't have like a traditional computer science background, but I was in a like very non-technical field. And I think when you're stuck in that position, you have kind of two options, right? For me, I was really interested in pursuing this career path. And so when I didn't get to do or didn't get like as many opportunities to practice my wet lab skills as I wanted, I thought to myself, how can I self-learn something that is very valuable as a skill set within academia or within lab work that still makes me feel like I have progress, that doesn't necessarily require like a graduate student taking time out of the day to like teach me manually like how to do things, right? And I also kind of understood that maybe my forte, because I didn't have like a molecular background, or I didn't have a ton of like super prestigious wet lab work, that I was losing a lot of opportunities there. So I thought, okay, well, I had been hearing a lot about R, and that was something that, back then a lot of people were using SAS, Excel to do their data analytics work. And R was just kind of bleeding out of the statistical departments and into other departments. And so I ended up Googling R. I tried to learn it on and off for like a year or two. Like I would start and then I would stop. I tried different resource and I would start and I just wouldn't catch it. Eventually, I ended up joining my local Our Ladies chapter, which is like a women's focused diversity group where you would just have workshops every month or so in R, same with like Pi Ladies. And I started to slowly get the motivation to actually stick with learning R at that point. And then eventually I ended up making enough progress in my R journey where I would catch the eyes of my PI, so my lab heads, because I was in two different labs, and they'd be like, oh my gosh, you know R. This random undergrad knows R. None of our graduate students know R. We don't know how she learned it, but we're just like So I started getting all of this work, right? Just like, we really need to get this like a bit of analytics done. We need to like somebody to write an R script to do XYZ. And I ended up kind of making my way up through there. Eventually, I kind of realized that maybe academia wasn't for me. I think a lot of folks get that journey at that point where they kind of make that decision. And there were a lot of cool opportunities that I got because of it within even neuroscience itself, because there's a lot of interdisciplinary work that happens from a computational perspective. But generally speaking, like I would do a lot of self-teaching and then I decided to move out of it. So hopefully that explains to people kind of like the trajectory that I ended up going down.
Yeah, absolutely does. And the fact that you took initiative to kind of learn R on your own and got curious about different statistical analysis techniques, and I think it kind of just positioned you pretty well, you know, to take on more opportunities. And I think that kind of leads into my next question a little bit. And it was like, it's around the earlier stages of your career. Was there a particular project or experience that helped shape your approach to leadership and innovation? And I'm just kind of curious, like if it started at an early point.
Yeah, there were probably two. I did end up inheriting that Our Lady's chapter. So the previous person who started that chapter gave it to me because I had been pretty active. And so I think through there, I was able to get a lot of contacts. Like, I think one of the best ways you can build your network is by organizing events. Do make sure that you don't end up being an events person, but generally, if you're hosting a lot of workshops and speaking opportunities, you get to know who's working in what in your local city, which is really nice. But probably the larger catalyst was I had a hackathon project called Bioxwirl that I worked on, and it was a bioinformatics hackathon that happened in my hometown every single year, and I wanted to submit a project. But I didn't really have like super hard technical skills, but I kind of knew that I wanted to do something like learning. So there was a really popular interactive course framework in R called Swirl, but there wasn't really any material for Swirl that extended into the bioinformatics realm. And so I created something called Bioxwirl, and we had it as part of the hackathon project where we would just write swirl like courses, but using like different materials from different fields. And that ended up winning the hackathon just because it was my first time leading a team, but the concept was really straightforward. And I think there was a real need for people trying to learn it. Because again, it's that same thing where you're having these non-technical fields now having to all of a sudden learn data science. And if you can make that journey really easy, I think people will catch on to it. And keep in mind this was like 2014 or 2016. And so it was a very different time where the resources weren't as abundant as maybe they were now. It wasn't nothing, but it wasn't as like fruitful. And yeah, I think that was my first time, and it ended up picking traction and people wanted to continue working on it. So this just ended up being like this 5-year endeavor where we just would meet on Sundays to try and get this project to move forward. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's certainly really good to hear, because I always encourage folks to focus on project work and contributions, and sounds like it worked out well for you. Yeah, you did mention quite a few career shifts along the way there, and I'm just curious to learn how you prepared maybe for each one of those career shifts, and maybe what advice you might give to someone considering a similar pivot, or even a laser focused specialization, like either way.
Yeah, I think one of my strengths just as a person in general is that I'm pretty independent, but I'm also very social. And it sounds weird, but I'm going to tie this together in a little bit. Because I think when you're social, you get to meet a lot of new people from varying different like levels and different parts of the field. And a lot of folks, when they're getting started in tech, especially when they get like their first internship and they're working as a software developer or something similar, a lot of their direct mentorship will come from people in their company who are like their managers, who are maybe seniors that they directly report to. And I think that's fantastic. Those people are quite close to your work, so they can probably provide the most accurate feedback for you. But generally, I think if you know where the community is, you can have access to the entire field if you want to. And that was one of the things that I really took advantage of, is that I would organize lots of communities. So I would get to talk with lots of seniors and ask them questions. And I would get to go online and I would ask similar questions. I would see what other people were doing, and I get to do one-on-ones with them. And that was really helpful, for sure. And, generally speaking, a lot of the answers are already out there. You just kind of have to know how to Google them and Google foo it, I guess. If you have strong Google foo skills, I feel like you'll be a strong technical candidate, just because you get to know how to search really precise questions and documentation. And so for me, it was similar. It was like, if I wanted to get into a specific framework, if I wanted to get into, a very specific technology or career path, I would find either the people that were relevant, that I could ask direct questions, and I would get to talk with them and send them emails, and then they would get to give me advice on how to move forward. Or I would get to like ask the questions and go on the forums and see the resources and what they would say. And that would be like my roadmap, I guess.
Yeah, it's smart. I have to ask this because I know all of us face this little bit of self-doubt, self-consciousness. We don't want to seem like we're unskilled or unknowing. And sometimes asking those questions to the people that you need to learn from is really tricky and hard. So how did you kind of overcome, just to kind of roll off of that last segment, how'd you kind of overcome maybe that setback, or like what something that was holding maybe you back from doing that?
Yeah, I think the first is that you have to accept that you're not smart in that moment, right? Like, and this is everybody. You have to be humble. And I think that if we think about somebody who asks us something, generally speaking, we don't mind answering questions as long as somebody's doing it respectfully. We might even really enjoy it if they're gassing us up a little bit, right? So if I go to somebody and I ask them a question like that I'm really nervous about, the first thing I do is that, hey, I really appreciate your career. I've clearly done my research in this person, and I'm asking them specific questions that kind of show them that, hey, I'm not just asking you really basic questions that I could Google. I'm asking you very specific things and showing you that I've done my research here. And that helps a lot because I think people are very receptive to it. I'm receptive. I'm very respectful of people's time. I don't try and take up too much room. And I let them know, I'm like, hey, if you don't want to do this, that's all right too. So I think a really good example of this is, um, like with one of my mentors, I initially reached out to them and I kind of like looked at their background. I knew that like they had very specific technologies that they had been working on and very specific projects, right? And so I wanted to ask them about those projects and their experiences developing those projects from a place that was beyond just like very entry level stuff. At that point, like when you're asking people these questions, the goal is not necessarily to show whether or not you're smart. It's just to sit back and listen. It's just to like really practice those active listening skills. And so during that first session, I didn't really talk at all. I just kind of asked them very pointed, very specific questions about their career, about their experiences, about how their perspectives were. And I just sat back and I listened. And during that point, I don't think that they ever thought this person is stupid or this person's inexperienced. Maybe if they did, that would be okay. That's just how it is. You have to kind of grow in that way. And then they kind of like just answered it, and I got what I wanted, which was the answers. So I would say really take the ego aspect out of it. And when I say ego, I don't mean to say you're egotistical. I mean take yourself out of the equation and just focus on the problem statement, on the person, and really, making sure that they have their outs and that they feel like you're respecting their time and that you're not asking super basic questions.
That's totally golden. I think that's super fantastic advice. So we've heard, that your outgoing networking has definitely played a huge part in your success. You're not afraid to ask questions, and you do it targeted and constructively, and you respect people's time. You've leveraged community, so, and not only just leveraging it, but trying to take an active role in leadership within it, and then also getting your hands dirty as soon as possible. So all this stuff that really comes together to kind of lead you into the success you're experiencing today. But something in particular, kind of transitioning now into current roles and more data focused roles that you've had, either in the open source communities or your current role at Data Strato. On top of all those aspects, are there specific skills and experiences that you found totally essential in the successful outcomes of building and shipping data products specifically?
Yeah, data products are really interdisciplinary. And so it's important to understand the impact of the data that you're working with, the project that you're working with in the entire organization. At the end of the day, a lot of stakeholders are not going to care how clean your SQL is. Your direct manager probably will from a technical standpoint, but generally speaking, like it's really a systems level discipline. And so you have to think at that level of how will this have downstream effects? What are people trying to get in terms of an answer out of this? For us, at least, because I currently, like, I used to do reports and I used to do these projects that would directly answer like stakeholder questions for C-suite. That would be like, are we being efficient enough in this way? Are we like, how much is this costing us? Um, and you have to understand what their strategy is and why they're trying to ask those specific questions so that you can then communicate your metrics in a way that, makes sense to them, right? Like I think one of the reports that like was in one of my last jobs that I was responsible for building a pipeline for was around kind of figuring out and tracking the design process of like a lot of the artists that we had. I was working for like a toy company and we were starting completely from scratch. And the reason was because it was costing a ton of money and nobody knew exactly where it was going. And it needed to be traced in terms of what the bottlenecks were, in terms of time, in terms of spend. And that's their entire core business model when you think about it. That's like, if they can't track that, that's extremely, like, that's a huge red flag, right? And so you have to be able to think from their perspective and empathize almost a little bit. If I was in their shoes and I was asking for this, what would be the purpose of it? Same with my current one. It's like data catalogs. When I first got onto data catalogs, which is like a metadata management system, I didn't really know that much about it. But there's a core problem here of, well, somebody wants a data catalog because they can't like really wrangle their messy architecture. And there's a very specific person out there that wants this. And I have to kind of transform into that person and understand what they would want or need and what that purpose is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Pretty much all of those skills are built on, like you mentioned, empathy, intuition, some business domain knowledge and business acumen. All of these things are somewhat, I guess we could call soft skills, which is interesting because you think that you have to be a complete genius at the technical skills. And I love that you called out all those other things that are really important and should not be ignored to be successful in actually solving problems, which is the core of what we do with data. So awesome. I love that. Now, shifting gears a little bit back into open source and contributions and leadership, kind of maybe before you got involved with Datastrato. You're an active leader. Could you talk a little bit about the contributions on the effects the contributions had on your career and how it shaped your professional network and the opportunities you were given?
Yeah, I think one of the great things about being a leader is that you're always at the forefront and you're always at the face of things. And that visibility can actually be really beneficial, especially in terms of network, because then you're moving from outbound to inbound almost. I think leading the Our Ladies chapter, it was nothing really super technical. Like maybe we would teach a workshop here and there, but it was mostly just finding the right people to reach out to, booking a venue, getting a sponsor for an event, things like that. Like it's really straightforward stuff when you think about it. But generally speaking, I got to become the face of that a little bit, right? And so when you take all these other projects like BioXplore, I kind of did the same thing where I was in more of like a leadership role there. And then I just kind of like trailed off and I got more comfortable with taking on leadership positions. It really helped like trailblaze that because then if I was at like a very specific conference, um, I got to reach out to people and I got to say that I was part of this thing. And even cooler, I got to recruit people as part of this thing, right? One of my current initiatives right now is putting together like a data ops course for the Linux Foundation, and it's forced me to have to really go deep into the DevOps community, go into the data engineering community, go into like the security community, like people that I would have never reached out to. And I have a reason to reach out to them now because I have this thing that I want them to join and contribute to. And that visibility really pays back its dividends over the years. Like it's like a garden that you're growing and you're watering and you're keeping in contact with these people. and you're showing them the work that you're doing. But through leadership, you get to be point on that, which is really cool.
Awesome. Yeah. So a key benefit definitely is growing your network and visibility. And I love the analogy of watering a garden with your network. Like it does come full circle sometimes, and you make all these connections, and eventually they like the work that you do and you can collaborate on something. That's awesome to hear. So those are some key benefits. I'm not sure if you know of any others, that we should mention to people getting started in their careers or looking to advance in their careers from open source specifically. But let's talk about
Yeah,
maybe
I
the
can.
best way to get started maybe, or how to find your groove.
Yeah, I would say also contributing to open source is a really big one because all of my projects were open source. It got to show people the work that I did, and it got to like they got to see the technical contributions that I made as well. Um, Previously, when I used to hire for one of my old companies, were hiring for two different levels. So I got to see two different levels at the same time. The first was like an entry-level data analyst, and the second was a data science manager. Within the data science, like the entry-level data analyst roles, there was a very big theme that I saw there, and that was that people would kind of publish Kaggle notebooks as these projects, and they would show like their boot camp or like certification experiences, and they would have maybe like a very boilerplate like GitHub repo where it would show again, like very similar to a Kaggle notebook, just like any random model that they could get to like a 99% accuracy. This is kind of before generative AI was so big. And so a lot of it was just more so like, hey, we did this random forest classification or this linear regression that had this very simple data set. And so if that sounds familiar to what you're doing, um, I would say that it's quite common to see that. And so if you want to get an edge forward in those sort of roles and fields, like one of the things that I saw with science managers and their resumes is that they were project driven and that they thought about scale a lot. And when you consider scale, when you think about how something affects the entire organization, but also the metrics behind it, it's not just the first step of, can I bring this model to 99% accuracy with the most basic data set possible? It's more so, hey, I took this data and I made it robust, and then I brought it to, yes, 99% accuracy, but I also had this added benefit of making it production level. Like you can see the code out, you can see that it was used by multiple teams at the same time. It wasn't just something that ran on my local system. And if you're at the entry level and you're looking at these roles, I would say the further forward you can think about production level systems, the better off you will be and the more eyes you will catch.
And it will help you sort of land more responsibility and more prestigiousness basically in the open source community when you start kind of thinking and thinking of projects in that way, right?
Yeah, and there's a hygiene there that I think really, like when we hire for engineers and scientists, there are really small things that we really look for that we don't always explicitly say. Like if I was doing like a SQL interview or something like that, like, yes, I'm looking for you to solve this problem in a way where like you're actually solving the problem and you get the right answer. But I'm also looking at, how cleanly did you name your tables, right? Is the code
Mhm.
readable? Is this something that's really convoluted? Can you explain why you made the decisions that you made? And there's a lot of things that we really score on that somebody who's been working in the field for a while will just kind of intuitively get, but somebody who's really new will kind of mess up at the first try.
Awesome. Those are really good considerations. So trying to shift out of the mindset of being just an individual contributor, and when you want to work on projects like this, maybe expand your perception and start thinking about how you code as a team, and you're setting people up for success that are working with your code as well. That's awesome. Um, I'd love to transition now and talk a little bit more about Data Strato and metadata. I know this is an area that you spend a lot of your time in, and you've given countless talks, and they're very educational. I highly recommend everyone checking out the talks that she gives on data architecture because it's cutting edge and it's very helpful, no matter what you're doing in data. But So I mentioned a little bit about what you're working on there. Can you share with us what excites you about the current direction of data infrastructure and AI, and maybe also what challenges you think are ahead?
Yeah, I think that generally speaking, most of the solutions that we've created around big data has been around scaling. And so we've tried to get the most performant engines. We've tried to dump as much data as we can into one big cloud system. And now we're trying to shift into accessibility. And I like that, right? Because my background is really in how people interact with technology and how people interface with it, a little bit more than even just the technical stuff itself. There's better people out there if you want to talk about how to do like low level memory access management at like the byte level. That's not me. There's brilliant engineers who are doing that, but it's not me. And generally speaking, in data infrastructure, we're noticing this move from closed source and accessible and expensive systems to open source systems, even if they're still not necessarily controlled by you. And we're seeing the simplification of what is generally a really complex architecture. And generally, too, I think our obsession with being the most performant, having the best scalability, into what is really more reflective of what most data companies and companies that use data are using, which is just like getting it to work, right? If you want the fastest engine, you're probably LinkedIn, you're probably Google, you're probably Databricks. But if you're a mid-sized company that's operating like out of Virginia or something like that, genuinely, like, you don't need the best stuff. You just kind of need something that works and is the most performant, that like works for the rest of your organization to tie it together. And you don't need to spend all that money doing all of that. And that's kind of the 80% use case that we're starting to see us finally trying to tailor instead of just, ooh, cool, shiny.
Right. And it's still scalable. I mean, it's still, that's the thing, is you can you can grow with it, but it's still a much more cost-effective solution and definitely overlooked a lot, I think, by, like you said, mid-sized businesses. Um, that's great to hear. So let's just for the audience kind of who aren't really familiar with metadata, and can you explain how it's being leveraged by modern data ops and data fabric integrations, or maybe just a little bit about what that is at a basic level?
Yeah, so if I were to take the example of like an image, right? Like when I look at an image in my Google Photos app or my Apple app, sorry, I'm not on the Apple ecosystem, so I don't know what the Photos is called there. Like I intuitively know what's in the photo just because my brain has done enough work to recognize a dog at this point. But the like machines don't necessarily understand what the photo is, and they don't have the memory of when I took the photo, and they don't have the memory that I was the one who took the photo, right? That's stuff that I know because I was there and I took the photo and stuff like that. So metadata provides like a small table or a small JSON file or anything like that. It can even be text that accompanies that image file that provides very specific properties around that. So a very common one in photos is like the subject, right? Image recognition has gone a long way where even Google Photos can recognize if I'm in that photo, and that's the label that's stored through metadata. It will tell me when this photo was taken. It will tell me what version of the data it was, where like if I've edited it and then I saved it, like is it the original one or is it the one that was like enhanced in some sort of way? Like this is all example of metadata that almost has nothing, like it's not stored anywhere in the original image. And so that metadata is really important. If we think about other types of metadata, such as metadata that might accompany a specific table or a document, that can then be leveraged to kind of be managed. So I can then say sort like documents or images there by date or by subject. And that's actually what's useful for us when we try and query or search through data. So metadata is really powerful in that sense at the most basic level, but you can also, use those sort of like annotations in a way to power other things like, lineage. Like how many transformations has this piece of data gone through? Because in metadata, we can store what transformation has been applied to it. If I like multiplied everything in this column by 2, and then I generated a new column, and then I have a version 2 of this table, can I trace that through metadata? Because it's not going to be stored in the table itself. And this helps power what we call data ops, where it's like data operations, where you can then trace, what this data has gone through. You can manage the data. So if I want to delete this piece of data, I'm deleting all of the versions of that data, or maybe I'm only keeping the most recent one. Or if I want to automatically build a pipeline around it, I can then use those pieces of metadata to power things like that.
Awesome. And can you maybe just mention like what one of your highlights of why you think this is going to be, or it is already such a game changer, the catalogs, and in the AI stack? Like, what is
Yeah.
the significance?
Well, data has gotten so large now. We're not just working with a Postgres table anymore. Like, I can't, as a human, actually manage the data on my own. If you give me, like, yeah, and even in my own Google Photos album, there's thousands of images. I can't manage that myself. If you think about a company, they probably have billions, billions and billions and billions of images. Like, of different versions of different time, like it's all crazy, and they have to store that, they have to process that. Somebody might try and find an image that was taken 10 years ago. I've certainly done that, right? Facebook has had to do that. I've certainly made that request to Facebook. And so companies have to actually utilize that metadata and leverage it in a way that works now, because we cannot feasibly as people manage it by hand manually. And so we need to build systems that machines can leverage to do it automatically for us.
Awesome. That's super informative. I'm sure all of you will now want to go find out more about how you can leverage metadata in your work, and I'm hoping that you do. Um, let's go ahead and start talking about some more of the fun stuff, things that I think are really beneficial for our members here to find out. So throughout your career, you navigated a lot of change. You found a unique path, and you tried a lot of different, options out. So was it a calculated strategy? Was it a combination of luck? How did you kind of stay aligned with your goals as you made these shifts?
I think over time, I learned a little bit more about what was important to me and my personality. And it's such a weird analogy, but it's kind of like relationships in a way, where you think that like that one person with those qualities is exactly what you want, but it's actually a completely different set of things. Like I used to think that it was like neuroscience. That was the thing that would make me happy. I wanted to do that thing, and that was the thing. But when I think about the way that I approached that field, it wasn't necessarily neuroscience itself or very specific things in neuroscience that got me going. The reason why I liked neuroendocrinology, which is again the study of hormones in the brain, was because it was a systems level thought process, right? This hormone interacts with X hormone to then like inhibit or like create more, and then that has different effects cascading. And so it's almost like data in a way when you think about it, right? If one thing is expressed and then it has these cascading effects, and then you can actually have your behavior then go back and change that again. It's a systems level thing. And I think data engineering was also that as well when I think about it. I did do data science for a little bit, and to be honest, like building models just wasn't for me. I didn't enjoy being granular and in the weeds, like trying to get the most performant model, like and playing around with those variables and that math. But I really enjoyed, okay, this piece of data goes here and then it affects this, and then it goes down there and it moves. And that's just how my brain thinks, right? And so I don't necessarily know if it's even specific to data engineering that I love. It's just that systems level thought. And that's what scratches my intellectual itch. And over time, I got to look and see that retrospectively. I also really like impacting people, but still staying like technical in some sort of respect. I like being interdisciplinary. And those all kind of came into play with how my career ended up shaping itself. I think in terms of very specific skills, I've always tried to look at a very specific field and try and leverage myself and my value by learning the skills that maybe they didn't have. So in research, it was like R. In data, it's DevOps because that's something that's really missing in that world, and like, data engineering or software engineering, but truly DevOps. And then kind of like in the data infrastructure world now, it's sort of that metadata management or open source stuff. And so generally that's kind of been my strategy in terms of goals, but even then it's not like a 10, 20, 30-year plan for the field. It's just how can I be this unique expert in the room just enough. I'm probably a bad DevOps engineer, but I'm a great DevOps engineer to a data person. And that's
Yeah.
really all I need to be at the end of the day.
Oh, that's awesome and fascinating. How you found kind of the underlying systems thinking was actually, what the passion was, not specifically this, the topic. I love that you kind of leaned into that and figured that out somehow. So my next question is kind of how did you discover those superpowers, the systems thinking that kind of drove, the rest of your development? And, how did you basically figure this out amongst all the industry shifts and the FOMO and the death spiral of all the things you have to learn and do?
Yeah, the tools will always come and go, and it's just like social media. Like you have to know when to jump in to stay relevant, but when to bow out for your own mental health. And I'm very lucky in that because I have a psychology background, I've always been pretty in tune with myself and introspection. Like I journal really hard. I think really hard about what I want and what my needs are, what I find fulfilling. And when you get to know yourself on that level, you really get to build that image and you get to put the pieces together of who you are and what you find really completes you, right? Like, what do you want to be in this world? What place do you want to occupy? And you can shift it around. You can bounce around different careers and you can have fun with it. I'm going to be honest, like there are amazing engineers out there who probably know the best of the best in terms of the current technologies and stack. I kind of conceded a little bit ago that that's okay, and I didn't need to be that person to be happy. I just kind of need to be somebody that I enjoy the work of enough to pay my rent and feel intellectually fulfilled and get to touch a lot of different folks in different fields. Because I'm somebody again who likes getting to know everybody and getting to see how the different pieces fit together. But somebody else out there is probably a very deep expert in one specific part of the stack. And I think that's how they like to operate too. Really narrowing down those questions for yourself and answering them honestly, I think is probably the best way that you can do it. And you have to practice that internal voice, and really give yourself that space to be honest with what you're doing and where you're going and who you are. And the more that you fixate on being somebody else, the more unhappy you'll be, right? Like, I'm never going to be an Instagram model that's like doing all the like that's okay. I don't really need that to be happy. But if I'm constantly trying to be the best in the room and a perfectionist because I'm insecure, because I'm unsatisfied with myself, then I'll always be chasing something that's probably not me, right? Say like, and that's something that women struggle with. We're perfectionists, and we have to give ourselves the room to be not perfect as well.
That is such great advice. I think it applies to all aspects of life, but you can also factor it into your career growth, right? You don't need to compare yourself to other people, and just compare yourself to you. Like, that'll make you happy. How are you? Are you better than the day before, right? Have you progressed since the day before? And I think that's really beautiful. And I love the fact that you mentioned journaling and introspection. It does kind of help drown out the noise and help you focus on what matters to you, to be the best you can be and bringing the value in what you're doing and not trying to be everything to everyone. I think that's really important. Really great advice. Good to remember, I think for all of us. So I think this is kind of one of the final questions I have for you, but what advice do you have for those trying to find their own direction in data specifically, particularly women in underrepresented groups who often find themselves either the only person in the room or not even able to come to the table?
Yeah, I think it really helps. Again, I mentioned mentorship in the field in general. There are going to be some bad experiences that you have if you're reaching out to so many people. I've certainly faced it as well. I've been the only woman in a lot of rooms. I've been the youngest woman in a lot of rooms sometimes. Generally speaking, if you want to do this, you have to find allies. I have found allies in really unexpected places sometimes, and to be honest, sometimes your allies are going to be the men in the room and not the women. That's just how it is, because everybody has their own prerogatives, they have their own goals. You can't always expect that that is going to shift. So find the people who are your allies and then kind of pick their brain and really keep them close and reward them, because they're going to help you find your direction and they're going to be your champions, right? They're going to be the ones that give you, recommendations or referrals for jobs. They're going to be the ones that really, 10 years down the line, like really stick up for you and keep you close. Finding your own direction is a really hard thing, and don't expect to get it right the first time. We're all very messy. Don't look at the LinkedIn profiles where you see the people's career trajectory, because we all kind of present that in a very specific way, and we don't really include a lot of the other smaller jobs that kind of got us to where we were in there. Even for me, I leave
True.
out a lot of stuff. It's really important to not use that as your metric for what your career should look like, because of course it's a cleaned up version of our thing. It's like if you look at a restaurant menu, you're gonna have this nice clean menu of all these perfect dishes, but it's not gonna show like the recipe development behind it. You're not gonna see all of the like failed recipes that didn't make it, and all the times that they spent like $10,000 buying like this certain type of meat only to have it not work. Sorry, I've been really into cooking lately because of that one Netflix show.
A good analogy.
Yeah, right? And allow yourself to have divergence, have playfulness with it. I'm really glad that I had those years in like psychology and neuroscience, because I'll never have that experience again. Like 40 years from now, I probably won't be back in the neuroscience, like in the wet lab, right? I'll probably still be in data or in something else. And you should savor those moments that you don't get to, like, because you'll never be back here again at this point in your career, at this job, and this company. And so allow yourself to enjoy it instead of constantly thinking about what's perfect. Um, and I'll also say too that your direction in data, I'm a very independent person. I'm very headstrong. I am very independent. But even then, you can only move in the paths that are open to you. And so if you focus more on opening as many paths for yourself as possible, you will have more ability to pick and choose where you want to go. But if you don't, and a lot of entry level folks don't, you can
Mhm.
only really pick up what you can get, right? And it's okay to take something that's not sexy. It's very easy to go, I want to be a machine learning engineer and I want to be a data engineer, but those are not entry level jobs. Like those are ones that most people like really work in the field for 5 to 7 years to get into, unless they were lucky enough to, go to an Ivy League university and get an internship at a FANG position and then work in that. Like it's rare, but that's like maybe like 3% of software engineers, right? Like that's a BS statistic that I came up with, but it's a very small percentage of actual
Yeah.
folks out there who represent the field. So yeah, hopefully that's a satisfactory answer.
No, absolutely. I think it is. And I love also the fact of, embracing your own personal journey, all of those little steps, savor them and don't erase your past because you feel like you need to totally shift gears and present this perfect picture of yourself. I think that's all very relevant and helpful. Definitely. I think we have some great questions here. So I definitely like to start opening it up to the audience. And I have Lena's question first. I'm going to take the mute off. Let's see here. Cool. So everyone's able to unmute themselves now, and please feel free to do that. I do have one question or two questions Lena's asked that we can pose to Lisa here. Does having notebooks on Kaggle still work, even though there are tons of them using the same data sets, or is it better to have your own websites? I think.
Um, the honest answer is neither. The point of the answer to the other question that this refers to is that when you're working in Kaggle, you're working in a small proof of concept thing. I would rather see somebody contribute, even if it's something small, to a larger project where they worked in a team of at least 10, 15 folks, than to like have another Jupyter notebook that they did in a silo in isolation with nobody else touching that code. That's the big thing, right? There's a lot of public data sets out there that are very similar to each other and are very easy to classify because they've been done over and over and over again. Whether or not that project is hosted on your website or somewhere else, it really is kind of the same if it's at that scale. What I find really impressive is if you worked on a project that at least one other person had to use, that one other person had to rely on. And it wasn't just this thing that happened over a weekend. I think over time, especially if you're experienced, you can really spot those things. And it's very apparent. So that's probably the answer that I have to that. Hopefully it makes sense.
Yeah, certainly. I think I'd add to, finding ways to create your own data sets and not using the reproduced very clean, publicly available to everyone. Like you mentioned, kind of just regurgitated data sets. If you can find clever ways of creating your data sets, I think that goes a long way as well. But yeah, certainly working with others shows your value and hiring value, right? Nobody works in a silo. So
Yeah.
that's a great answer. This one is particularly interesting to me because there's a lot of career pivoters. Is age a barrier to an entry level position? Have you found?
It's changed a lot over the years. I think it's way better for women now, even like especially those who are returning from mat leave, than it was previously. But it is. I think it is for men and for women. And it depends on the type of roles that you're going for, generally speaking. So if you're looking at strictly entry level positions and you have not been able to leverage your experience in another field, even if it's non-technical, that's a little bit of a red flag to me as a hiring person. So let's say that I am hiring for a data analyst position and I see that somebody has 10 years in operations or supply chain management. I would expect them fully to leverage those skills in their data analytics position, even if they had low technical skills, right? They should be able to demonstrate that they think at a project level, that they understand, the way a certain company works or can present different reports, and that's senior level thinking, right? And that's probably what I would expect. And so hopefully you can, mitigate that in some way, but you can also really get by on reputation a lot. So if you're doing cold applying, which a lot of folks do, and I think is the worst way to apply for jobs, you're going to get screened out on many different factors that you have no control over. But if you're building a reputation, you can negate something like age really easily, in my opinion. So if you're like if you get a contract from somebody who knew you because you organized a certain community that they went to for 3 years, yeah, your age probably won't matter that much at that point. But if you're just another random resume in a pile of 1,000, like it's gonna be harder.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've definitely gotten the advice before not to include any age indicators if you can, as far as education goes in your resumes. But yeah, certainly cold emailing and cold applying is not the best method. So yeah, I think that is very, very sound advice. Awesome. Um, great. Do we have any other questions? We've got maybe about 5 minutes here to see if I can answer, or if Lisa can answer any other questions for you. Feel free to unmute if you'd like as well. This is totally interactive, and this is a really good opportunity to learn from someone who's just really a pioneer in their own right. So hopefully you can take away some inspiration. I have let's see, I have one just so we can maybe, you know, maybe drum up some conversation with the participants. Has anyone here in the audience made a career pivot recently? And I think there was someone who was considering coming out of um, academia, or maybe someone who's transitioned from engineering, electrical engineering. I think I saw a few. Is there anyone that wants to talk about the challenges or successes you're facing, and maybe that might drum up some questions? Has anyone participated in any open source projects or contributions that they want to discuss here as well? We could talk about that. Awesome, we got a question. Do you have any tips to network to find jobs? Do you contact people through LinkedIn or do you go to in-person networking events? I think,
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
I've done both. And it depends on what your strength is. I've contacted people randomly through LinkedIn, and some of them have been my best allies and best friends, for sure. And I literally just started the LinkedIn message going like, hey, like I really like your like profile and I like these experiences that you have. Like, can I ask you some questions or can we chat about like whatever the field is that you're working in? I replace some of those words with more specific words. Like in one of the case, one of my best friends, Jonathan, I messaged him randomly on LinkedIn. I was like, you have this awesome blog on data DevSecOps. Nobody else is talking about this. Let me pick your brain. Like, and I just gushed over his profile a little bit. And we just ended up like meeting on Google Meet, and then we just talked and right, like we just chatted and I got to pick his brain and we ended up building this long-term relationship from it, which is fantastic. I do the same at networking events, but generally speaking, like picking a few several that you can ask what they're doing and then follow up with them on that is probably going to be more beneficial than going to like 10 different things and then asking them the same thing, like, can I pick your brain? It's really important, whether or not you're going online or in person. It's really important in my like perspective opinion to ask very specific questions and to respect their time. I think that 70% of the people who dry reach out to me on LinkedIn that are not salespeople or people with like other specific business goals are typically asking me very general questions like, are you hiring? Do you have this job opening? And that's not necessarily how you build a network. Your career is going to be very long. It's going to be 20, 30, 40 years. You know, plant the seeds, be friendly with people, enjoy the friendships that and the unique perspectives that people offer, because if you have that very specific goal to get a job, you're almost using me in a way, and I can tell. And I don't really have much to offer you in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Also open yourself up to help others. You never know what might come up from that. I know that we all need to be cautious with our time, and it makes sense that you can't help everyone, but be open to those, people who reach out to you to start conversations as well. You might be surprised. I think that's helpful
Yeah.
also.
The other piece of advice that I would add on to this is don't go for the folks who have like 10, 5,000 followers on LinkedIn. There are many engineers and professionals out there with an incredible breadth of experience that have like 500 connections on LinkedIn, 200 connections on LinkedIn. They've just never done the social media route. They are a wealth of advice and they're not inundated with as many inquiries as the folks who are super popular on LinkedIn are. Like one of my mentors, and she's amazing. She's this completely unknown engineer from Thailand. And her and I meet at such odd hours, and she's given me the most valuable advice. But nobody really knows her, to be honest with you. Like she's just not, she just has always been very technical as a principal and doesn't have this need to be the social media influencer. And so nobody would really ever find her otherwise, but she's very available. She's super nice. She's one of the best mentors I've ever had. So find those people. They're gonna change your career.
That is such good advice. Yeah, and they're just not as visible, right? You almost forget that there are those folks out there, and not everyone wants to leverage social media in the way that others do, and not everyone's trying to be a thought leader, but it doesn't mean there's not some value there. That's really great advice. I love that. Well, Lisa does have a stop time soon. Would you like to take one more question from the audience here that we have in our chat?
Yeah, we can take a couple more. I have time.
Awesome, thank you. So when you mentioned building a portfolio by working on long-term projects with others, are you referring to open source like projects, or are there other ways we can work on projects like this? How does this look like, and when you really don't have the technical experience? So just getting started on these projects as in a team, I think is probably the core of the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a great question. Open source is a really easy way to find projects, but you have to really look at the repo, see if it's being actively developed, reach out to the people who are actively developing those projects and see if they're willing to, collaborate with you and have a meeting with you to discuss it. There are other ways you can work on projects like that. I think hackathons are a great way to work on those projects, but really hackathon projects that are maybe a little bit more developed. So if I were to take an example of like maybe Jupyter Notebook, we all use Jupyter Notebook at some point, right? Directly contributing to Jupyter Notebook might be a little bit intimidating. At least it would for me. I don't know about anybody else. So one of the things that I would do if I was really curious to work on a technology like that, I would look at some maybe projects that were a little bit smaller that accompanied or enhanced Jupyter Notebook. So there's, a whole Python package out there that's just dedicated to making slides out of Jupyter Notebook through Markdown. Like that's its own project, and it has less stars than Jupyter, but it's just as valid of a project to work on. Or another project that's maybe just like, importing new themes into Jupyter Notebook. It might even just be a theme itself, like literally just changing the colors. And those are projects that people are genuinely working on, right? And using every single day. Those are definitely ways to get out of the box if you want to find the thread and then follow those nodes to the edges. I think that's one way to do it. If you're active in different communities like the Apache Software Foundation, in the Linux Foundation, in the R community, whatever language that you're currently working in, there will be like on those Slacks, different projects that are posted. You can ask people directly what they're working on. One of the folks that I was talking to recently, like he worked on a project called like SQL Fluff or something like that. And I had not like heard of it, but that seems like a good project that you could just go in mid-sized, but it's still used by a lot of seniors probably, that you can just directly start contributing to. The way open source has also shaped itself recently too, has become much more accepting of non-technical contributors. So if you don't have technical experience, everybody is always looking for technical writers because documentation is always out of date. That's a great place to start. Even with our project, Apache Gravitino, that's one of our weak points. I'd love for more people to get into technical writing. Technical writers now are actually official contributors in projects. So this is something that Apache kind of officially made in part of their policy, where anybody who does a number of technical contributions in writing can be considered a committer on the project, which is really, really cool. And projects out there will really prize and love and value their writers a lot. So that's a great way to learn the technology and to contribute to the core project, I think.
Amazing. It seems like the barrier to entry is not as high as we all place in our head. We always think we have to be really savvy to get involved in an open source project, and it's nice to hear you could technical, right? You could work on something very simple, and you're actually learning while you're doing that. A lot. So I think that there's no reason why you shouldn't just get started now. It's awesome. One last question here for the night. You mentioned the people contacting you asking, "Are you hiring?" Is there anyone who's reached out to you with a cold question that really impressed you and stayed in your memory by chance?
To be honest, not really. And I think that speaks out to like when you get like dozens and dozens of LinkedIn messages, and I'm on the lower end of the spectrum compared to some people I know who get hundreds of messages. I think generally when we first look at it, we have to find some sort of way, because LinkedIn doesn't do it for us, unfortunately, to categorize the email in some sort of way, or the message in some sort of way. Like, what is this person trying to get from me? What is the point of this? I'm skimming through it really quickly. I can almost tell within the first like half second of looking at it, is this a sales call? Is this somebody asking me to speak? Is this somebody wanting to use our product? Is this somebody who's looking for a job? Like I know right away. My brain is really good at sorting that at this point. And if I don't have anything in mind, and even if I do, it's really rare that I will want to push somebody who I don't know off of LinkedIn for a position. When I first hired, I used to be that person that, if you messaged me on LinkedIn, I would go out of my way to find your resume and then I would push it forward. And I got so burnt out doing that. But also, I was setting a lot of folks up for failure because they had this expectation that they were further along in the process that maybe they thought. And I even got like some really negative comments back on that when I used to do that. And so I've kind of learned not to do that anymore. Um, Generally speaking, what does work if you're going to go down this route is, again, ask somebody like learn about their experiences, try and be somebody's friend first, right? Like say, hey, I want to pick your brain about your career, about the tools that you're using. Build that relationship. It's like dating. Like have a few
Mm.
first dates first where you feel out the vibe, and then you ask if you want to be their girlfriend or boyfriend. You can't just jump in and say it, because then people are going to be very defensive about it, right? And you should be able to value somebody for what advice they have to offer as is, versus if they can't get you a job right now, you're putting them at a valueless position. And I think that is a really bad way to go about it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of people have adopted the same mindset as you to vetting the cold messages, right? Even people that don't have the following that some do. I think we've all subconsciously have learned kind of to tune out the noise a little bit and filter out, the cold messages. So just think about how you react to those messages. And it's going to go off the same way, if not worse, to someone that you're trying to get a job from if you don't honor that space and that filling out the vibes and becoming someone's friend and showing that you have some very targeted information that you're trying to get related to them. So that's really great advice. I also just wanted to add on that hopefully this discussion encouraged you to think about volunteering or contributing to projects. And I think those are two of the biggest takeaways for getting your career kicked off. Lisa, we're so grateful that you were willing to share your knowledge with us. Our audience just loved it. So thanks everyone for joining. Look forward to the recording, and I hope to see you all in the community and we can keep the conversation going there. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.